I'd finally finished packing for a week-long trip. I was excited for a long fishing trip with two of my closest friends, but I had a few doubts. My friends and I have been close since elementary school, practically like brothers, and we've always cherished our time together. This trip felt different, though. We've done everything as a group with our wives, always by our side when we were. We were all still young when we even dated each other's girlfriends before we all settled down. The original plan was for all three couples to come, but Mark had to drop out at the last minute because of a big meeting, so his wife Shelley decided to stay back too. Then, a couple of days before we were set to leave, Wes found out he had a meeting on Friday, so his wife decided to skip. Beverly, my wife, also decided to skip the trip when she heard that the other wives wouldn't be joining. It wasn't shaping up to be the kind of vacation I was used to, and I was pretty disappointed. We usually go together, have a great time, and the best part for me is the extra close we always seem to have. During and after our trips, I was more frustrated about missing out on that than on the fishing. Even so, Beverly and I had enjoyed an amazing week of intimacy before the trip. It was almost to the point of exhaustion at times. I would have preferred to catch a few extra hours of sleep, but she was determined this was our typical I was looking forward to our usual trip routine, which usually involved a lot of spontaneity. We'd be intimate maybe twice a week, but it always felt rushed. It seemed like her mind was elsewhere. This was a far cry from when we first got married, when we'd sneak away anytime we found even a moment of privacy. The decline had been gradual over the years, but it became painfully clear about 5 years ago. That summer, we went from being physically close nearly every day, sometimes twice, to maybe 2 or 3 times a week often. I tried to get things going, but Beverly wasn't interested at first. I was pretty frustrated, but after a few minor arguments, I gave up trying. When it had been long enough, I just took matters into my own hands. That Thursday night, I found myself in the office, drinking a beer and taking a short break from packing. Beverly was upstairs putting the kids to bed, then slipped down to the kitchen. A few minutes later, she joined me in the living room with a glass of wine in hand. She settled in next to me, took a sip, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read her mind. She started, her tone serious. "I need to talk to you and I need you to really listen." Her face looked tense, almost scared. "I know what I'm about to say could make you mad, but please let me finish before you say anything. I'll answer any questions afterwards." She paused, looking almost pitiful, nervous but determined. "I just should have told you sooner, but I needed to work through some things first. I have to be honest, we haven't been as physically close as we used to be. Carrie, I love you, but you just don't excite me in the same way. I don't want this to affect our marriage. You're a great dad, a great provider and my best friend, but I need something more." I felt anger rising inside me. What was she saying? I knew she'd been distant, but what was all that intimacy last week about? I opened my mouth to protest, but Beverly held up her hand. "Carrie, you promised to let me finish," she reminded me firmly, swallowing my frustration. I clamped my mouth shut and leaned back, listening. "Carrie, I met someone," she continued, her voice steady but soft. "It's someone I've known for a while, and there's just something about him. I can't go back to how things were. I want to be with him, and I didn't want to lie to you or go behind your back. I still care about you, but I need this with him. I feel alive like I did when we first got married. I can't get enough of that feeling." I was shocked. I couldn't believe she was saying that she'd been unfaithful. Beverly was calm as she spoke. She pushed me gently back into my seat. "Carrie, I told you that you wouldn't like this, but you agreed to listen, so sit down and listen." I stayed there, trying to keep myself in check as she went on. "I'd told Wes about the legal stuff. I'd get at least 2/3 of your income in alimony and child support if we divorced. The kids and I would keep the house, and you'd get half the savings in your retirement. You'd struggle. From a financial standpoint, the kids would be caught in a broken home, so for their sake and for all of our sakes, I'm asking you to accept this." She looked at me, her eyes oddly sincere. "I still care about you, and nothing has to change. We'll still be intimate, just maybe not as much as before. But you need to know that some nights I'll be out with him, and sometimes I'll take trips with him. I was sitting there in shock, feeling my anger boil over after a long pause. I managed to say, "Beverly, I thought you loved me. And now you're tearing my heart out. How long has this been going on? Who is this guy?" Beverly looked at me sharply, her voice full of irritation. "Carrie, insulting me won't get you anywhere. I hope you can get over this grudge and that we can carry on as we've been for years, but I'm not giving you any more details. I'm not going to give you any details, like when or where or who. It's none of your business. If you tried to find out more, there will be consequences." She paused, letting her words sink in, and then continued. "I've had another lover before this, and I'm tired of hiding. You need to hear it from me because I can't keep sneaking around. I need nights with him in this way. You can be home to take care of the kids while I take care of my needs." I stood there stunned as Beverly kept going, calmly but firmly. "I'm not telling you who he is because I know you'll try something reckless. And you could end up hurting yourself, or even going to jail. The kids need you. You're our rock. If you push, you'll face the consequences. I've set up measures to make sure of it." The ease with which she laid out her plan took me by surprise. It was clear she'd been preparing for this. I said, "Well, I'd better give the guys a heads up that I won't be coming on this trip. We need to settle a few things here." I reached for my phone, but Beverly caught my hand. "Carrie, you're going on this trip," she said firmly. "The kids will go to your parents' place as I've planned this, and I'm not staying here alone for 2 weeks. You need this time away to adjust. If you try to change plans, you'll regret it. We have eyes and ears everywhere. If you dig for answers or disrupt things, I'll know, and you'll pay the price. Accept this arrangement, and I'll make sure things don't get worse for you." Beverly walked over to the desk, pulled out a thick envelope from a drawer, and handed it to me. "This is a report on your activities over the past month. Read it, and you'll understand that we're aware of everything. If you try to interfere with my plans, I will make sure your life is destroyed." She turned her head upstairs. "Now I'm going to bed. If you want to join me, that's your choice. Nothing needs to change, Carrie, unless you force it to." I sank into a chair, feeling the weight of her. I was looking at the notes in the envelope. They were really detailed, going over things like a small stain on my shirt, or a casual glance at a woman passing by. It made me think about how much it must have cost to get this level of surveillance. It made me ask even more questions. Was she connected to someone powerful, someone wealthy? Maybe even. 2 hours later, I finished reading and felt uneasy. They knew things that only I should know. Was I being tracked? Was there a bug on me? Or was it all just part of a twisted game she was playing? Beverly came back downstairs, looking at me with a calmness that only made me angrier. "Carrie, are you coming to bed or are you going to sit here soaking all night?" She turned and headed to our bed without waiting for an answer. I stayed on the sofa, my mind too consumed to follow her. The next morning, Beverly. She woke me up with a sharp tone, telling me to get up and get ready for work. She said I needed to get organized and that I should have slept in our room the night before. "When I get back from my trip, I expect you to act normally. If you want a separation or if you disrupt this family, you know what's at stake. I'm willing to meet your needs on occasion, but I expect you to pull your weight in this marriage. If you find another woman, I'll divorce you without a second thought." My anger flared up and I finally let loose, saying, "Beverly, you expect me to. You're okay with all of this while you're with someone else, but I don't get the same freedom. I wasn't planning to, but why do you get to decide it's fair for you and not for me?" She looked at me with a smirk. "Carrie, let's be honest. You know what I'm offering is plenty. If you want someone else, it's just to spite me. If you can't fulfill your part of the marriage, why shouldn't I look elsewhere?" I replied, my voice shaking with frustration. "You've never once told me you wanted something different or more. How was I supposed to know? I should have realized something was missing if you acted like everything was fine. I always made sure you were satisfied, but I didn't realize you thought anything was lacking." She stood there unbothered and replied, "Carrie, if you have to ask, it shows just how out of touch you are. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. You never really understood what I needed, and eventually I stopped believing you ever would." I felt crushed, barely able to form a response. I staggered up to start my morning routine, running on autopilot at breakfast. Our son Ryan noticed my mood and asked if I was okay. I opened my mouth to reply, but Beverly cut me off. "Your dad's just got a bit of a work issue on his mind. I'm sure he'll be back to normal after the holidays." She shot me a look that silenced me instantly, then went back to her breakfast. Later at work, I decided not to follow Beverly's suggestion and canceled the trip I'd been set to leave on. After work, we met up at Chuck's house to load up my SUV with gear and head out. Pete was supposed to ride with me while Wes would take his own car since he needed to return midweek. I called Pete to let him know I'd changed my plans and offered to let him use my truck if needed, but Pete interrupted me. Sounding firm, I said, "Oh no, Carrie, that's not happening. I just got off the phone with Beverly, and she said you might try pulling something like this. She mentioned you've been stressed lately, and she even talked to your assistant to confirm you had nothing urgent planned. I promised her I'd make sure you went on this trip. If you need a lift, I'll come with you. I'm sure you'll enjoy it." I was about to say I couldn't go, but something made me stop. What if Pete wasn't coming? Beverly had mentioned plans with her new guy, and Pete was supposed to come with me, but Wes was staying home and joining us midweek. Could it be him, or was someone else involved in this mess? I felt trapped, knowing I had to be careful. I needed a way to monitor things, maybe set up some cameras, but even that could be tricky. From the report, I could tell Beverly had been tracking my purchases and phone calls. I had to be smart and cautious, but the weight of this new reality was almost too much to bear. They were even tracking my cash withdrawals and would catch any unusual expense I made overnight. I sat at my desk lost in thought when my phone rang. Beverly's voice was on the other end, sharp and cutting as she wasted no time. "Carrie, I told you to go on this. I'm on a trip and I'm not going to get into my personal life. Pete just called to say you tried to cancel. This is your last warning. Don't try to contact me or ask questions or you'll be out on the street, and you'll never see the kids again. Is that clear?" She slammed the phone down before I could respond, leaving me frozen in shock. Pete had reported me. Was he involved in this, or was he just trying to look out for me lately? None of my friends felt as close as they once did. It was like they were more Beverly's friends than mine. It seemed like she had them on her side, but could they really all be in on this? No, that couldn't be, or could it? I decided not to push my luck and went along with the trip. I met the guys at Denny's for dinner. They were their usual lively selves, joking and laughing, while I mostly sat there brooding. Eventually, Wes noticed and asked Carrie what's going on. "You've been a bit off lately." I looked up at him and after a moment's hesitation, I told him. "Beverly's got some wild idea in her head and I don't know how to handle it. Part of me can't believe she's serious, but if she is, well, my marriage is probably over." Pete and Wes exchanged a look. "Man, Beverly called me this morning asking me to make sure you came along on this trip. She said you've been a bit difficult to be around lately, so I think you need some time away to clear your head. I told her we'd make sure you got here and enjoyed yourself." Wes nodded, looking me over. He said, "Yeah, I've noticed you've been a bit on edge these last few months. Carrie, you haven't been yourself. Maybe this trip is just what we can relax, have some laughs and get your mind off things. I even brought your favorite whiskey." He gave me a nudge, trying to get a rise out of me. "Come on, buddy, nothing's ever kept us from the cabin before. Sure, the ladies won't be around this time, but that just means we can relax even more and drink a bit." It was our time, and they managed to persuade me to come along. We headed up to the stream where we'd planned to fish. It was only a couple of hours' drive, so we arrived just in time for a drink before turning in for the night. The next morning, they were eager to start fishing, and I tried to keep my mind off everything, but when we got back to the cabin, I found myself thinking about Beverly again. I still couldn't believe what she told me, but it did make me think. That evening, after dinner, we were sitting around with drinks when Wes glanced over at Carrie and said, "You've got the look of a man who's lost his best friend." "I know that's not true. I'm right here." "What's on your mind?" I figured I might lose my mind if I didn't talk to someone, so I decided to open up. These guys had been my closest friends since grade school. If anyone could give me sound advice, it was them. I laid it all out, how things had been fading over the past few years. Over the past few years, there's been a growing distance in our marriage. Then Beverly dropped the bombshell revelation last Thursday. When I finished, Wes leaned back, clearly stunned. "Carrie, are you sure that's what she said? I mean, I can't believe Beverly would even think something like that. We've known her for years and she's always been. She's sweet and caring, yeah, I thought the same thing," I replied, "but that's exactly what she said, as best as I remember. It's hard to wrap my head around it, but she was dead serious." Pete rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Well, Carrie, I can't say what would happen if you went through with a divorce, but I'll be honest, you'd have. There's a lot to think about if she's serious. You really have to decide how to respond. Breaking up the family would definitely impact the kids. The courts usually favor the mother in custody battles. Unless you could prove she's unfit, you'd probably lose custody. You'd have to keep up with child support until they're plus. There's the college expenses, since she doesn't work. You'd likely owe her alimony until she remarries. Then there's the house. Either she'd get it or you'd have to sell and split the proceeds. Your retirement savings would go to her." I heard all of this from Pete, who's an attorney. It felt worse than hearing it from Beverly myself. I felt trapped. I need to know who she's seeing. She won't tell me, but I'll find out and make sure she doesn't see him again. Pete sighed and shook his head. "Carrie, I understand your frustration, but as an officer of the court, I'm obliged to inform you that if you take any action against her partner, I'll have to report it. My advice is to let it go. Don't let her infidelity influence your decision-making." I shot him a look of frustration. That's all I needed to hear. To just roll over and accept it? What would you do if Shelley pulled something like this on you, threatening you the way Beverly's doing to me? Pete looked uncomfortable, pausing before replying. "Honestly, I'd probably be as angry as you are, but I know Shelley wouldn't do something like that. She loves me and knows she's the best partner I could ask for. We have a great life together, and I don't think she'd risk that. But if I were in your shoes, I'd think about my options. Anger won't help you in the long run. Carrie, you might just have to accept your fate." Pete said his tone was oddly casual. "He told me that Beverly has someone watching your every move. It seems like you're out of luck. Based on the report she gave you, if you try to find out who she's with, she'll know and there will be consequences. It sounds like she's pushed you to a point where she'd catch wind of even this conversation. She knew where we were headed. I didn't think she'd do this," he muttered, looking concerned. I noticed an odd look on Pete's face, and Wes too had this strange satisfied expression the whole time we'd been talking. I couldn't understand what they seemed so unfazed by Beverly's betrayal. Finally, I shrugged it off, raising my glass. "Well, forget it. I thought I'd have another drink the next morning." I woke up before the others and decided I needed some time to myself. I took my fishing gear and hiked upstream to my favorite spot. I was just about to cast my line when my cell phone rang. Reception was usually spotty here, so I was surprised it even worked. It was Beverly. I saw that it was Beverly calling. I let it go to voicemail, and when I saw that she'd left a message, I played it back. What she said rattled me. "Well, honey, my friends tell me you got some really sound advice from Wes last night. I hope you're planning to take it. You're a good man and an even better provider and father, but if you do anything..." I was pretty shocked. I thought, there's no way she could have known what we talked about unless she'd been listening somehow. I'd even considered that she might have bugged me, unbeknownst to me. Pete and Wes had been watching. From my vantage point at the edge of the trees, I watched as they shared a knowing grin and gave each other a thumbs up before slipping back through the woods toward the cabin. As they walked away, Pete turned to Wes and said, "So you think this will do the trick, or should we keep tightening the screws?" Wes chuckled and replied, Let's keep at it. If we keep feeding him the right kind of advice and showing him there's no point in resisting, we'll have him right where we want him in about a month or two. It'll be much easier to enjoy our time with Beverly when we don't have to worry about sneaking around as much." Pete laughed. "Exactly. And if he goes spilling the beans to his wife or anyone else, we'll just keep telling them we're trying to help him out. It's the perfect cover." I was out fishing until by noon. My thoughts kept drifting back to my marriage and the need to find out who Beverly was with. I wanted to end things, but I knew I couldn't take action until I had some solid answers. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Beverly had spent the day with her mystery lover. She was clearly waiting for the others to arrive. "Oh, I've needed this for so long. I can't wait for the rest of the guys to get here. Wes should be joining us by Wednesday." Her companion smiled. "That's right, sweetheart. You'll have both of us for 2 full nights before you have to go back to babysitting your adoring husband." He smirked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I'll be so glad when all 3 of us can be together at once. Beverly, I hate having to split my time after all that's happened. Carrie could never satisfy me again. We've taken care of all the details. He's a wonderful provider and an amazing father. I don't want to. We've got this covered, but I just hope he doesn't start talking to other people and causing problems. We've had a good thing going for 3 years now. Maybe we should have been content with how things were, but the chance to spend full weekends and evenings with you without any of these restrictions is worth it. Just don't put too much heat on, okay? He might turn into a real problem if he catches on to everything we've made him look bad for," Beverly replied. "If he ever finds out and tries to expose us, no one will believe him." She continued, "I've checked over all his finances like we discussed. I can't limit his check writing, but I've had the bank put restrictions on his cash withdrawal. Honestly, I kind of regret urging him to hire that assistant. She's been way too effective, which is a bit inconvenient." Beverly giggled and said, "If I hadn't arranged things to stay home, we wouldn't be able to enjoy ourselves like this, would we? You know, just a few evenings a month or during occasional trips wasn't cutting it. Now I get to be with you whenever I want, thanks to this little plan." Meanwhile, I sat by the river, staring into the water. My friends tried their best to cheer me up, but nothing seemed to break my mood. They got me drunk on Tuesday night, and once I was out cold, Pete and Wes slipped out onto the porch to talk. I heard hushed voices. "I'm starting to get worried about Carrie," Pete said, sounding tense. "We've been talking to him It's been 4 days now, and if anything, he's more determined than ever to leave Beverly and get back at her new guy. He's wound up tight. He could snap at any moment. How do we keep control of this? It all sounded so easy when we planned to keep him under our thumb and get her to ourselves more often. What if he figures it out and tells our wives?" Wes just shrugged and said, "Relax, Pete. I've got this. What if she actually goes through with a divorce? So what? She only wanted to keep Carrie because he's a pushover. I enjoy our time together. She's married, but it'd be almost as fun without the marriage. We just have to keep him in the dark and make sure our wives don't find out." I caught a few bits of their conversation from inside the cabin. I couldn't hear much, but I could tell they were annoyed that I hadn't accepted Beverly's infidelity, and were planning to convince me otherwise. My anger grew, not just at her but at them too. I went back to sleep, telling myself I'd handle this without their help. I called for help over the next few days. I distanced myself from them more and more. Pete and Wes seemed genuinely worried, especially when I told them I'd find out who she's been seeing and they'll pay for it. I guarantee it. When it was time to head home, Pete Rose came with me. We sat in silence. Wes drove separately and called Wes as soon as he had cell service. Meanwhile, Wes and Beverly sat in my living room. I was in the room listening to Wes give them the lowdown. He was seething with anger. Wes said that if anything, he's even more determined to make us pay. I think we need to back off a bit and let him cool down. If he catches on, we're all in trouble. Beverly sat there visibly shaken, tears streaking her face. Wes' jaw was clenched, and his face was flushed with anger. After Wes hung up, he turned to Beverly and pulled her close. He said, "Don't worry, Beverly. I didn't want to go hard unless I had to, but it looks like we're out of options. Let's see how things go this weekend. If he's still acting out by Sunday night, we'll file the paperwork on Monday. I can freeze his accounts, both personal and business, with the right court orders. We'll make sure he can't do anything drastic late Friday night." I returned home only to find Beverly waiting for me in the living room. Her eyes were red as if she'd been crying, but she looked calm, almost like she'd just finished an intimate evening. She was wearing one of my shirts and little else, and I could tell she wanted me to notice. As she passed through the room, I saw telltale signs of her escapades on her skin, and my anger nearly boiled over. She looked at me, almost daring me to say something. I met her gaze silently, then turned and walked past her without a word. She followed me into the bedroom, and when I stepped into the shower, she tried to join me. I told her to get out. I came home hoping we could work through this, but seeing you tonight made it clear that's impossible. You may try to ruin me, but I will find a way to get my revenge on you and whoever else is involved. After showering, I quickly gathered whatever belongings I could fit in my truck. Beverly stood. I saw her in the hallway, phone in hand, and heard bits of her conversation. Before I left, I tried to log into our joint account on the computer, but she changed the password. I was frustrated, and I could see she was too. She said she hoped I'd change my mind before it came to this. "Carrie, I love you more than any other woman I've ever known, and I don't want to lose you, but if you keep pushing you'll lose everything, including the business and everything we've worked for. Just so you know, I've hired Wes as my lawyer. I just spoke with him, and he knows how you've been acting." I couldn't believe it. Wes had been my lawyer and friend since he started practicing, yet here he was siding with her without a word. I left. I went to my office and planned to stay there for a while. I'll use the conference room as a makeshift living space. When I got to the office complex, I stopped by the security gate and spoke to the guard. "I'm dealing with some personal issues. My wife and her companion have threatened me. I need you to arrange for additional security and keep unauthorized individuals off the property." The next morning around 10, I left the complex to grab breakfast, but I was stopped at the gate by a man who asked for my name and handed me an envelope. It said, "You've been served." Inside, I found a restraining order that said I couldn't come within 100 meters of Beverly, the kids, or our home. The documents also included a court order that required approval for any personal or business expenses, effectively freezing my finances until the divorce proceedings started on Monday. After breakfast, I drove to my assistant's house. When she opened the door, she looked at me with concern. "Carrie, you look terrible." "What happened?" "I need someone to talk to. I'll be there on the weekend, but I don't know who I can trust right now." She stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in, Carrie. Can I get you some coffee?" I followed her into the kitchen where her husband was sitting at the table, clearly surprised by the unexpected visit. Brunch was half finished with plates of eggs still on the table. I took a step back, feeling like I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. "I'll go." Her husband looked up from the table, studying my face. "Carrie, you look like hell. Sit down and talk to us. Whatever's going on, you don't have to handle it alone." I opened up to Hank and Penny, telling them everything that had gone down since that awful Thursday, almost 2 weeks ago. I don't even know what to do next or how to get out of this mess. I've been trying to get my best friends to convince me to let Beverly carry on with this affair. They say that if it's been going on for years without me noticing, I shouldn't rock the boat with Wes, my ex. My best friend is now Beverly's lawyer, putting up all kinds of legal blocks against me. I can't even touch my own money without court approval, which won't come through until at least Monday. This morning, every single one of my credit cards was declined when I tried to pay. Penny looked stunned when I told her about the morning's events. "Carrie, I can't believe Beverly would do this to you." She turned to Hank and said, "If you need a place to stay, Carrie, we've got a spare room and we could lend him a little money so he can get by for now." Hank nodded and I sat there with my elbows on the table. I was sitting at the table, feeling more helpless and angry than ever. But after a few moments, I felt a growing sense of determination. Hank said, "If everything you're saying is true, Carrie, you need some serious help. But we should make sure you don't have a bug on you." He gave me a pointed look. "Come with me," he said, leading me to the basement and stopping at the bottom of the stairs. "Let's be safe," Carrie said. "Take off your clothes. I'll grab you something of mine to wear and put your things outside. Clean up in the shower here. When you're ready, we'll talk." Once I'd changed, we huddled. I started explaining everything again in the concrete room under the stairs. I felt a bit ridiculous, but I was hoping I wasn't being overheard. Hank and Penny took notes, and for the next hour, we came up with a plan. Hank agreed to reach out to some contacts who might be able to help, and we decided that for now I'd rely on Hank and Penny financially. On Sunday, I had lunch with Hank and Penny while Beverly, Wes, and Pete had gathered at my house. They'd worn each other out, so they lounged around. Pete finally spoke up, sounding tense. He said, "I'm starting to think we're pushing it. If Carrie finds out and decides to confront us, maybe we should back off a bit and calm down." Pete said, shrugging, that we've got Carrie locked down. He can't even access his own money. We're watching him constantly, and right now he's probably crying over his coffee at Hank's place. If he tries anything, we'll know before he's a block away. As they continued, none of them noticed the man outside who was filming their every word and action through the window. Monday morning, I began looking for a lawyer without Wes, who had always handled my legal work. I felt completely lost. After a few interviews, I decided to go with Georgina Edison. She made a great impression and had lots of great references. The first thing she did was file motions to unfreeze my business accounts so I'd have enough money to live on. She even hired a private investigation firm to track Beverly and set up a video surveillance system at the house. I told Georgina to go ahead with the divorce proceedings on the grounds of infidelity that evening. Hank handed me the footage he'd captured the day before. When I watched it, I felt pretty angry. I also felt a bit betrayed by my 3 so-called friends. I called my friends to tell them what was going on. I knew I was up against some tough competition, but at least now I had a plan. The next morning, I went to my office and made 5 copies of the CD. I sent one to each of my friends' wives, another to Georgina, and kept one for myself. I locked the original in a safety deposit box. Then, I uploaded the videos to several pay-per-view sites. I used everyone's real names on the sites. I set up the site from Wes's office, so when it got traced, Wes would be the one facing the consequences. I also sent similar videos and photos through email from a computer at the local college library. I knew I'd be nearly impossible to trace because those computers needed student logins, but I always found one left on, which made it easy to use someone else's account on. On Wednesday, I got calls from people who'd seen the videos that evening. Beverly called, her voice shaking with tears. "How could you do this, Carrie? I thought you loved me. I told you it was just because you couldn't meet my needs. How could you ruin me like this?" I laughed coldly. "Beverly, you did that yourself. I'm just following through on the consequences I warned you about. Now I realize you've probably been at this for years. The times you thought I wasn't home and came back late, it all makes sense now. I've had enough. You'll regret ever crossing me." My sister Eva called. "It seems you've finally figured out the truth about your perfect wife. I guess you sent out that video. I had no idea she was hooking up with all 3 of them. It seems you're learning something new every day." Her laugh was bitter as she hung up. Then Wes called. As soon as I answered, he launched into a rant, yelling insults and threats. "You're an idiot, Carrie. By the time I'm through with you, you'll regret ever crossing me. I'll be with your precious. I'll have your wife anytime I want, and I'll take most of your money too if you'd only listen. You'd still have your family, your money, and a life worth living, but now you'll end up scraping by in the gutter when I'm done." Beverly's parents also called her mother, tearfully asking, "How could you do this to her? I know she hurt you, but spreading these images everywhere was extreme. Couldn't you have handled it in a more civilized way?" By the end of the day, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I knew I still had a fight ahead, but at least I'd struck back. I'd installed an advanced answering system at my company, so I knew I'd have every word recorded for when I needed it. I didn't think it would end up being a key tool in exposing Wes. Back then, he was still my lawyer and friend, advising me to get the system installed for call security. The setup was pretty simple. Each time a call came in, it would answer with a recorded message: "Thank you for calling Central Inventory. All calls are recorded for later use. If you don't want your call recorded, please hang up now." If the caller stayed on the line, they would be recorded. Anyone who ignored the warning had agreed to being recorded. It turned out that Wes either hadn't paid attention to the warning or was so angry that he'd missed it. Every threat and boast he made was captured on tape. I'd insisted he have the telecom operator program that message, and now it was his words being used. Once the divorce case began, it was almost satisfying to see the sense of justice prevail. Beverly's little crew backed off fast, which was lucky for me. Hank's friend had already captured all the damning video and audio from that first Saturday. Otherwise, the private investigators I'd hired didn't get much. There were a few incriminating calls here and there, but they were vague at best and mostly useless for the case. Georgina wasted no time. One of her first moves was to report Wes to the state bar. His threats and unethical behavior led to it. He was suspended immediately and ultimately disbarred for life. It didn't erase everything, but knowing he couldn't practice law again felt like a win. My divorce went through quickly after that, and Beverly came out with much less than she'd hoped, just 25% of our assets, while I retained control of the company. The judge awarded me custody of our children largely due to a critical photo. Hank's friend had captured it by accident. He'd been taking pictures of Beverly and the guys in our living room and ended up catching my daughter peeking in through the patio door. My daughter, who was 18 at the time, saw the photo, and it helped me win custody of her. I also won my lawsuits against Wes and got about $1 in damages. The damages were $3 million. He was charged with violating attorney-client privilege and with a conflict of interest, because he took on Beverly as a client, while he was losing cases and while his wife, Shelley, was taking money from him in their divorce. Wes was left nearly bankrupt. Mark and Shelley divorced as well, and she got most of his assets. Pete and Jessica, however, didn't. It turned out that she'd been involved in their little arrangements all along and was a willing participant in their escapades. Pete's patience wore thin, especially when Wes and Mark started staying with him and monopolizing Jika one night. Things came to a head and Pete attacked them. Wes and Mark fought back hard enough to land Pete in the hospital. Charges were filed. Pete and Jessica divorced after that. It was nearly a year after it all settled. I was in my office going over the latest news about Wes, Mark, and Pete's fight over Jessica when Penny looked up from the article and asked if I'd spoken to Beverly at all. "I know she can visit the kids under court supervision." Supervision? I shook my head. "We only talk when it's absolutely necessary, and that's only about the kids." I'd avoid that for years if I could. I thought she was the one, and I still don't understand why she did what she did. I can't get my head around how a woman who loved her husband could do that. Penny sat quietly as I opened a drawer and pulled out an old folder. I slid an old folder across the desk. I don't know why I kept this letter. I didn't even know why I agreed to read it. But do you remember about 7 months ago, when Beverly's mother came in here crying and handed me this letter? She insisted that I read it, so I did. Penny opened the folder and read Beverly's words. "My dear Carrie, I know you don't believe I have any. I know I have no right to call you that anymore, but you're still the only man I've ever loved. I know I've lost you forever, but I have to tell you what's in my heart. I never meant to hurt you. I never planned to cheat, but I did. You probably remember how close I was to Wes and Pete when we were all in high school. You never seemed to mind back then. The first time I cheated was almost it was an accident. It happened on our 9th anniversary. You had to work late on a major theft case, so I went to Wes and Shelley's Valentine's Day party alone. I drank too much and ended up in a bad spot. Shelley asked Wes to drive me home with Mark following to bring him back in the car. Wes started bringing up memories of our high school days. By the time we reached the house, I guess I already lost any sense of judgment. I told them to stop at first, but they kept reminding me of old times, and eventually I gave in. That night, we were together for nearly an hour. I won't lie, Carrie. I enjoyed it. Maybe it was because there were two of them, keeping me completely involved. After that, it kept happening at least once a month. If we could sneak away, we did. I know you noticed how I'd sometimes disappear during those weekend getaways. Then Wes suggested the open marriage idea, saying it would keep things from blowing up. I was convinced you'd never risk losing the kids or our life together, so I agreed to his plan. I'm really sorry, Carrie. I was weak and selfish. I'm begging you, please forgive me for being so selfish. I'm yours forever, Beverly. When Penny finished, she looked up, her eyes glistening, her jaw tight with anger. Carrie, I think Beverly did love you in her own twisted way. I think Wes manipulated her from the start. We've both heard the rumors about him over the years, and I wouldn't be surprised if he got her. I nodded. I know Penny, but even if there's some truth to her story, I can't be sure it's the whole truth. Beverly was always more drawn to Wes than I ever liked. We'd sometimes argue after parties because I thought she was being too friendly, but I never said anything that would lead to a big fight. After I finally caught her, thanks to you and Hank, I even got a DNA test on the kids. You can't imagine the relief I felt when I knew they were mine. I sighed, looking down. Maybe she thinks she loves me, but I don't think it was real for her. It was more about comfort and convenience. I was a good provider and a good father, so it was easy to stay with me, but I think I was just her last resort. I loved her deeply, but I don't think she ever felt the same. She only cared about her pleasure and her needs. I looked out of the window, letting the words sink in. It's strange, Penny. I always thought I'd be alone after all this. But if I could just find someone real, someone who wouldn't betray me, I think I'd be ready to start again.